Daily life inside ADX Florence, America's toughest prison. The Silent Fortress. There is a prison in the United States where silence is not a metaphor, it is policy. A place where human contact is measured in minutes per week. Where the doors are solid steel. Where the windows are narrow slits designed to prevent inmates from ever seeing the surrounding mountains. This is ADX Florence, officially known as the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility. It is widely regarded as the most secure prison in America. Not because of what happens here, but because of how little happens at all. Why ADX exists. ADX Florence did not exist until the federal government decided it had no other choice. In the 1980s, a series of violent incidents inside federal prisons shook the Bureau of Prisons. In 1983, 2 correctional officers were murdered on the same day at the U.S. Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. The perpetrators were already considered among the most dangerous inmates in federal custody. In response, Marion was placed on permanent lockdown, a model that would later be expanded, formalized, and rebuilt from the ground up. That blueprint became ADX Florence. Construction began in the early 1990s. The facility officially opened in 1994. Its purpose was narrowly defined. To confine inmates who could not be safely managed anywhere else. Not temporarily. Indefinitely. Location by design. ADX Florence was built in Fremont County, Colorado, roughly 120 miles south of Denver. The location was not chosen for convenience. It was chosen for isolation. The surrounding land is sparsely populated. The climate is dry. The terrain is flat and exposed. From a security perspective, escape is considered virtually impossible, not just because of the facility itself, but because of what surrounds it. There are no nearby urban centers. No natural cover. And no place to disappear. Who is sent here? ADX Florence does not house ordinary federal prisoners. Inmates assigned here typically fall into one or more of the following categories. Individuals convicted of terrorism-related offenses. Leaders of organized crime deemed still influential. Inmates responsible for serious violence inside other prisons. Prisoners considered ongoing national security risks. Assignment is made by the Federal Bureau of Prisons after internal review. It is not part of the sentencing process. A judge does not send someone to ADX. The prison system does. How long an inmate remains here is not publicly disclosed and varies by case. Some inmates spend years. Others, decades. The architecture of control. Everything about ADX Florence is intentional. The walls are poured concrete, several feet thick. The doors are solid steel with narrow viewing ports. The ceilings are high, but inaccessible. Sound does not travel easily here. That is not accidental. Each housing unit is designed to prevent inmates from communicating with one another, either verbally or visually. Even when prisoners leave their cells, they are typically alone. Movement is controlled electronically from centralized control rooms. Every door. Every gate. Every step. The cell. This is where daily life happens. Each inmate is housed in a single occupancy cell measuring approximately 7 by 12 feet. The furnishings are fixed. A concrete bed. A desk molded into the wall. A combination sink and toilet made of stainless steel. The window is narrow, about 4 inches wide, positioned to allow light, but not a view of the outside world. According to Bureau of Prisons documentation, the design prevents inmates from determining their exact location or observing security patterns. The cell door remains closed approximately 23 hours per day. The hook, a day without sound. Imagine waking up every day without hearing another human voice. No casual conversation. No shared meals. No spontaneous interaction. At ADX Florence, silence is not a side effect. It is the environment. And for many inmates, it lasts for years. Before we go deeper inside America's most restrictive prison, take a moment to support this channel. If you find value in deeply researched, fully factual stories like this one, liking the video and subscribing to the Inmate Diaries helps us continue sharing these stories with the accuracy and depth they deserve. Your support makes this work possible. Daily schedule, structure without variety. Life at ADX Florence follows a rigid schedule. Wake-up times, meals, recreation, all occur at set intervals, controlled entirely by staff. Meals are delivered through a slot in the cell door. Inmates eat alone. There is no communal dining. According to Bureau of Prisons policy, inmates typically receive 3 meals per day that meet federal nutritional standards. Food quality and variety are not publicly documented in detail. What is documented is the absence of choice. Recreation, alone in the open air. 1 hour per day. That is the standard amount of recreation time afforded to inmates at ADX Florence. Recreation does not mean group sports. It does not mean social interaction. In most cases, it means standing or walking alone inside a concrete enclosure sometimes described by former inmates as a dog run. The walls are high. The space is small. The sky is visible, but distant. Recreation may be cancelled due to weather, security concerns, or disciplinary reasons. Human contact. Human contact at ADX Florence is limited and highly regulated. Interaction with correctional officers is typically brief and task-focused. Conversations are minimal. Physical contact is virtually non-existent outside of controlled situations such as restraints during movement. Visits from family members are allowed under strict conditions, often conducted behind glass, with communication through a telephone. Frequency and duration vary by inmate classification. Mental health, documented concerns. ADX Florence has been the subject of ongoing scrutiny regarding mental health. Multiple lawsuits and investigations have raised concerns about the psychological impact of long-term solitary confinement. The Bureau of Prisons states that mental health services are available and that inmates are regularly evaluated. Critics argue that the environment itself exacerbates existing conditions. This debate is ongoing. There is no public consensus. What is documented is that some inmates at ADX have been diagnosed with serious mental illnesses before, during, or after their confinement. The level system. ADX Florence is not a single, uniform experience. Daily life is governed by a multi-level classification system that determines how much, or how little, an inmate is permitted to do. The Bureau of Prisons does not publicly disclose the full operational details of this system, but court records and oversight reports confirm that inmates are placed into different housing steps or phases, based on behavior, perceived risk, and compliance with institutional rules. Progression is possible. But it is slow, tightly controlled, and not guaranteed. Step-down units. The most discussed pathway out of the most restrictive conditions at ADX Florence is known as the step-down program. This program was expanded following litigation in the early 2010s, after federal courts required the Bureau of Prisons to provide clearer criteria for inmates to earn reduced isolation. In theory, the step-down program allows inmates to move from near-total isolation to slightly increased interaction, and eventually, possible transfer to a less restrictive federal facility. In practice, timelines are unclear. Some inmates spend years attempting to progress through these stages. Others never advance at all. What progress actually means. Even at higher levels within ADX Florence, progress does not resemble normal prison life. Inmates may be allowed limited group recreation with 1 or 2 other prisoners. Slightly increased out-of-cell time. Educational materials under strict review. Additional phone or email privileges. However, these privileges can be revoked at any time. There is no independent appeals process outside the Bureau of Prisons. And there is no public data on how many inmates successfully complete the full step-down program. Communication with the outside world. Communication from ADX Florence is heavily monitored. Phone calls are recorded and reviewed. Mail is screened. Email, when permitted, is subject to electronic monitoring and content restrictions. Attorneys are granted confidential access under legal protections, but even those visits occur within secure, controlled environments. For inmates classified as national security risks, additional communication limits may apply. Exact criteria for these restrictions are not fully public. Medical care inside ADX. The Bureau of Prisons states that inmates at ADX Florence receive medical care equivalent to other federal facilities. This includes routine medical evaluations, access to prescription medications, emergency care when necessary. Medical staff are on site. Specialized treatment may require transport to external facilities under heavy security. Critics argue that the isolation environment complicates effective treatment, particularly for chronic or psychological conditions. These concerns have been acknowledged in court proceedings but remain contested. Psychological effects. What is documented? The psychological impact of long-term isolation is one of the most studied, and disputed, aspects of ADX Florence. Court filings and expert testimony have documented symptoms reported by some inmates, including anxiety, depression, cognitive impairment, difficulty reintegrating into social environments. The Bureau of Prisons maintains that mental health professionals regularly assess inmates and that those diagnosed with severe mental illness may be transferred to specialized units. Civil rights organizations argue that prolonged isolation itself can cause or worsen mental health conditions. This debate remains unresolved. Use of force and discipline. Use of force incidents at ADX Florence are rare compared to other high-security prisons. This is not necessarily due to compliance, but to the lack of opportunity. Inmates are almost never in proximity to one another. When force is used, it typically involves cell extractions, restraint procedures, transport-related incidents. All such events are documented and subject to internal review. Public access to detailed statistics is limited. Who has been held here? ADX Florence has housed some of the most high-profile inmates in modern U.S. history. These include individuals convicted of domestic and international terrorism, large-scale organized crime leadership, espionage, mass casualty attacks. While media attention often focuses on famous names, the majority of inmates at ADX are largely unknown to the public. What they share is a classification that deems them unmanageable elsewhere. Staff life inside ADX. Life inside ADX Florence is not defined only by those incarcerated. Correctional officers undergo specialized training. Shifts are tightly structured. Movement is deliberate. Interviews with current and former staff suggest that working at ADX requires constant vigilance, but involves fewer spontaneous violent incidents than other maximum security prisons. The psychological toll on staff is not well documented publicly. Escape, why it hasn't happened. No inmate has ever escaped from ADX Florence. This is a matter of public record. Security measures include multiple perimeter fences, motion sensors, armed patrols, continuous surveillance, redundant electronic controls. Combined with the remote location, the facility is designed to make escape attempts detectable long before they could succeed. Is release possible? ADX Florence is not always a life sentence. Some inmates are eventually transferred to other federal prisons after progressing through classification levels. Others remain until the end of their sentence. The criteria for release or transfer are not publicly standardized. Each case is reviewed individually. For many inmates, ADX Florence is not just a prison. It is where their sentence is truly served. The cost of control. Operating ADX Florence is significantly more expensive than lower security prisons. Exact per inmate costs are not consistently disclosed, but federal budget documents indicate higher staffing ratios, infrastructure costs, and security expenditures. Supporters argue the cost is justified by safety. Critics argue the human and financial costs are too high. This debate continues in policy circles. ADX Florence represents the farthest edge of incarceration in the United States. It is designed not to rehabilitate quickly, but to contain absolutely. The first legal challenges. From its earliest years, ADX Florence has existed under legal scrutiny. But it was not until the late 2000s and early 2010s that sustained, large-scale legal challenges began to reshape how the facility operates. The central issue was not physical conditions. It was isolation. Multiple lawsuits alleged that prolonged solitary confinement at ADX Florence caused or worsened serious mental illness, violating constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. These cases did not emerge from speculation. They were built on medical records, expert testimony, and internal Bureau of Prisons documentation. The Smith v. Federal Bureau of Prisons case. One of the most significant cases involved inmates diagnosed with serious mental illness who were held at ADX Florence. In 2012, a class action lawsuit argued that placing mentally ill prisoners in long-term isolation created a substantial risk of psychological harm. The case did not result in a declaration that ADX Florence was unconstitutional. Instead, it led to a settlement agreement. Under that agreement, the Bureau of Prisons committed to expanding mental health screening, improving treatment access, creating clearer criteria for removing mentally ill inmates from extreme isolation, modifying aspects of the step-down program. These changes marked one of the most concrete shifts in ADX operations since its opening. What changed after the lawsuits? Following the settlement, the Bureau of Prisons reported several reforms. According to official statements and court monitoring reports, some inmates with serious mental illness were transferred out of ADX. Mental health staffing levels increased. Evaluation procedures became more formalized. Step-down placements expanded. However, these reforms were incremental. ADX Florence did not cease to function as a Supermax prison. Isolation remained the defining feature, though with additional oversight. Whether these reforms go far enough remains a subject of ongoing debate. International human rights criticism. ADX Florence has not only faced criticism within the United States. International human rights bodies have also examined its practices. United Nations Special Rapporteurs have repeatedly expressed concern about prolonged solitary confinement, stating that isolation exceeding 15 days may constitute cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. While these statements are not legally binding on the United States, they have influenced global discourse on Supermax prisons. U.S. officials have responded by emphasizing national security concerns and internal safeguards. The disagreement reflects fundamentally different philosophies on incarceration. National security inmates. ADX Florence plays a unique role in national security incarceration. Some inmates are subject to additional restrictions under Special Administrative Measures, known as SAMs. These measures are authorized by the U.S. Attorney General and are typically applied to inmates deemed capable of directing violence or terrorism from prison. Under SAMs, communication is severely limited. Contact with other inmates may be prohibited. Media access is restricted. The exact number of inmates under SAMs at ADX is not publicly disclosed. The criteria for imposing these measures remain classified in part. Life under Special Administrative Measures. For inmates under SAMs, daily life becomes even narrower. Mail may be limited to legal correspondence and approved family contacts. Phone calls are rare, short, and heavily monitored. Group activity is generally prohibited. These measures are reviewed periodically, but renewals are common. Civil liberties organizations argue that SAMs can function as indefinite isolation. Federal authorities argue they are essential for preventing external threats. Media access and secrecy. ADX Florence is not open to the public. Media access is extremely limited. Journalists are rarely permitted inside housing units, and interviews with inmates are highly restricted. As a result, much of what is known about daily life comes from court filings, former inmates' sworn statements, government oversight reports. This lack of transparency fuels both criticism and speculation. What remains clear is that ADX Florence operates largely out of public view. Comparisons to other Supermax prisons. ADX Florence is not the only Supermax prison in the United States. But it is the most restrictive at the federal level. Compared to state Supermax facilities, ADX features longer average isolation periods, higher security classifications, greater use of single-cell confinement. Even among Supermax institutions, ADX Florence stands apart in design and policy. It represents the most controlled environment the federal system has created. The question of deterrence. One unresolved question surrounds ADX Florence. Does it deter violence? Supporters argue that the existence of ADX discourages serious misconduct in other prisons. Critics counter that many inmates sent to ADX are already serving long or life sentences, limiting any deterrent effect. There is no definitive data proving either position. The Bureau of Prisons does not release comparative studies on deterrence outcomes. Aging and long-term confinement. As decades pass, the population at ADX Florence has aged. Some inmates now suffer from chronic illnesses associated with long-term incarceration. The Bureau of Prisons has stated that age and medical condition are considered during classification reviews. However, critics argue that elderly inmates remain in isolation longer than necessary. The balance between security and humanitarian concerns continues to evolve. Deaths inside ADX Florence. Deaths have occurred at ADX Florence, as in all long-term correctional facilities. Some were due to natural causes. Others involved suicide. Each death triggers internal review. In certain cases, external investigations have followed. Details are often limited due to privacy laws and ongoing litigation. The Bureau of Prisons maintains that it follows established protocols for suicide prevention and medical response. The future of ADX Florence. ADX Florence remains operational today. There are no public plans to close it. However, its role continues to be reassessed amid broader discussions about solitary confinement, prison reform, and national security. Some policymakers advocate stricter limits on isolation. Others argue that facilities like ADX are necessary in a dangerous world. The future of ADX Florence will likely reflect how the United States balances security with evolving standards of human rights. What ADX Florence represents. ADX Florence was built to answer a specific question. What do you do with inmates who cannot be contained anywhere else? Its answer is control. Total, methodical, unyielding control. Whether that answer remains acceptable, or sustainable, is still being debated. ADX Florence exists at the extreme edge of the American prison system, built for control, isolation, and containment above all else. Whether it represents necessary security or a system pushed too far depends on who you ask. What's clear is that for the people who live and work behind those walls, the impact is permanent. If you value deeply researched, fully factual prison documentaries, support the Inmate Diaries by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing it with others who care about truth over sensationalism. Thank you for watching. Until next time.